Everybody, thank you for joining us for our January Conservancy Day. We're really excited to have you all here. People are chiming in from all over the country, tuning in from all over the country. So I think people are very interested in this talk. We're really happy to have Fred Clark and Adrian Wydeven, sorry, speaking tonight. Let me just share my screen here one more time for a couple of housekeeping things. Okay, I got to figure out how to, there we go. The Friends of Pheasant Branch Conservancy have been around for more than 25 years now. It's very exciting. If you are interested in perhaps becoming a friend, you would help, your membership fees would help continue to allow us to continue to have programs like this one, our Conservancy Days. It supports watershed advocacy for the Pheasant Branch watershed, restoration of the prairies and wetlands and forested areas, and education efforts to reach out to students in the school district and children of all ages who want to come out and learn a little bit more about the Conservancy. The Friends are helping with a really important campaign going on right now that's called Seed the Need. The Seed the Need campaign is an effort to raise $100,000 in funds to create a platinum prairie at the extension, the new addition that's been added to Pheasant Branch on the property just north of the existing property, the old acre farm. And the reason the county wants to create a platinum prairie there is because it would become a seed bank for the rest of the county, and we could really help to diversify our prairie species all around the county. It's very exciting. If you'd like to contribute to that or become a friend, we are sending out a follow-up email with a link to both of the campaign and becoming a member. And I'll also, in that follow-up email, you'll get a survey link, and you could tell us what you think about this survey and maybe what you thought about this talk, and what future topics you might be interested in enjoying in a Conservancy Day. You can see our upcoming Conservancy Day topics. We're starting a new thing this year where we're going to partner with other groups to run for our Conservancy Days. So the next one is February 8th, and it's Sustainable You with the City of Middleton Sustainability Committee. And it's about greening your routine, what you can do at home to expend less, fossil fuels and be more sustainable in your own home. And that's going to be hosted through the public library, and that's where you would register. So you can get registration information from our website or from the public library. On March 17th, we are going to have Jim Bachhuber, who is a former board member, give a really interesting talk about Pheasant Branch Creek. Where does all the water come from? He's going to focus on especially the big flood, why it happened, and what the Pheasant Branch watershed is like, and what are the concerns there, and what makes it special. That talk, we hope, will be in person and would be held at Cromrie Middle School. Our future presentations for Conservancy Days are moving from Thursdays to Wednesdays, the third Wednesday of the odd-numbered months. So we're going to do half the number of Conservancy Days this year. Stay tuned for our website for more information. I should have introduced myself. I'm Ann Boucher. I'm the former education coordinator for the Friends. Kayla Matty has taken over for me. She is the new coordinator, and if you have any questions about this program or anything else the Friends do, you can reach out to her. This is set up in a webinar for feedback format. And so if you could please put your questions into the question and answer section in Zoom, then I will be monitoring that. And after Fred and Adrian are done and we move on to questions, I'll go through those. I haven't put in the like upvote thing, move it to the top. I'm hoping I can just go through all the questions and get everybody's questions answered. Okay, and with that, I need to stop sharing and turn things over to Fred and Adrian. We're really excited to have you here. I'm going to try to set the view up for everybody so that you will see the speaker and not see what I see. So with all of that, welcome Fred, welcome Adrian. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you, everybody. We're really glad to be here. My name is Fred Clark. I'm the Executive Director for Wisconsin's Green Fire, and I have the convenience of living not too far from Pheasant Branch. I'm just up the hill near Hoyt Park, so I'm sorry I didn't have the chance to ride down or walk down or drive down tonight, but nevertheless, glad to see folks here from all over the region for this talk. I'm going to start just by telling you all a little bit about our organization, Wisconsin's Green Fire. We, and I'm going to see if I can successfully start my slideshow to do that. And how does that look?
Looks good.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Fred. I should tell everybody that this this is being recorded and it's going to be posted to our YouTube channel after the talk. Thank you.
Wonderful. So Wisconsin's Green Fire is, we are a 5-year-old organization founded in 2017 with a mission of supporting our state's conservation legacy through science-based management of natural resources. And our vision and the vision of the members, the many members who founded this organization, was really to restore and breathe new life into Wisconsin's long, proud, and incredible conservation tradition. You know, this state, our state, has been a national leader in so many areas around environmental protection and conservation of natural resources over the last century and beyond. And really, our mission is to continue that tradition. We do that really on the strength of our membership. We're a membership organization. We have just over 700 members today. Roughly half of those members are career conservation professionals from one discipline or another. We have experts in water law, in wildlife management, in fisheries management, forest management, the sort of environmental engineering disciplines. Basically, if you think about our Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources today and everything they do from parks to air quality, we have members and we have focus areas within that realm in Wisconsin's Green Fire. And that is really what makes us unique, is that we've got literally thousands of years of career experience within our membership that we focus around good policy and good outcomes. We do that by working with the public, working with media, and working with legislators and policymakers. We have a policy liaison, Paul Heinen, who's in Madison and works in the Capitol. He's really our eyes and ears in the Capitol and with state agencies. We do that through work around the state, working with other conservation groups, where our expertise can be valuable in helping advance pro-environmental outcomes. And increasingly, we are also growing and becoming more diverse as an organization through the formation of a student chapter and a group of young professionals in our organization who are continuing to grow a base of young professionals who are interested in conservation careers and really creating a multi-generational structure. Our work, a lot of it involves policy and policy analysis. You can think of us like a think tank with an attitude. We tackle many different conservation issues in sort of a deep dive way. So if you go to our website, Wisconsin Greenfire or wigreenfire.org, you can see examples of the sort of policy work that we do. We've done work in the last year around the environmental contaminant PFAS. We've done work in the last year around oil pipelines and how oil pipelines are regulated, and specifically with regard to the Enbridge Line 5 pipeline, which is a significant issue in the Lake Superior region today. We have done a significant amount of work this year around deer policy and around wolf policy, which Adrian will be talking about more. So that's really our stock in trade, is to be able to take expertise and institutional knowledge and put it in service of making good outcomes today. So we encourage you to check out our website and check out some of the publications there. And again, we do this work primarily through the work of our career members as volunteers. And we kind of organize ourselves around at least 10 different issue areas, including air quality, water quality, energy policy, climate change, fisheries and wildlife, and forestry and public lands. And in that way, we're able to be nimble, we're able to build teams around different issues. And when an environmental issue comes up, often agencies will come to us and say, look, we're looking for partner organizations that can help us better deal with this issue. And because we have strong relationships with state agencies, we often have the ability to play a leading role in both advancing awareness and also being an advocate on the side of good policy. I'm excited to have the chance to be here along with Adrian, who's one of our career members and who is also one of the Midwest's, I think, preeminent experts in wolf biology and management. And I just want to note that many of you probably noted our name as an organization, Wisconsin's Greenfire. And many of you may remember or recall that reference picks up the writing of Aldo Leopold, in which he describes his time with the National Forest Service in Arizona in the early 20th century. And his job as a forest ranger was to shoot predators. And he writes about shooting a wolf from the edge of a canyon in the mountains of Arizona, and watching the fierce green fire slowly go out of the eyes of the dying wolf. And that was a really seminal moment for him. And that is really the legacy that our name reflects. It's appropriate tonight because of our topic. And our member, Adrian Wydeven, has had a career in wildlife management, including many years as the state's top wolf biologist, main and I guess only wolf biologist for many years. But really, Adrian helped lead the development of Wisconsin's wolf management program, a respected expert in the field, many, many years and many nights out tracking wolves, and really heads up our wolf conservation program today. So with that, Adrian, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I'll pull up my screen. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Anne. Let's see. There we go. Looks like we've got everything in place. Yes, I'd like to talk to you this evening about the conservation of wolves in Wisconsin, a little bit about the history and biology and how they've gone from being an endangered species in the state to being a game species just in the last couple of years. Let's see. Oh, I do not have control. How do I get this to move?
I think if you look in the lower right, there may be some faint buttons that'll show up if you hover your cursor, or lower left, I'm sorry.
Or you might be able to hit the space bar.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep, it's working now. Okay. So, is there a way we can squeeze this into a smaller box? Like with Fred's talk was in a smaller box and the pictures to the right. And the way my images, I've got to pick our pictures over part of the talk, part of the
I
PowerPoint.
think you have to go up to your view in the right corner, which is going to be tricky because you're sharing your screen.
Okay.
And if you unshare for a moment and then go up to the upper right hand corner of your screen, it should say view, and then you can change how you're viewing it under my view. You can, standard is to have our 3 pictures across the top.
Yeah. My view. So I stop share.
Yep.
Now I don't see anything.
Yeah, you got to click inside somewhere to bring up view. It doesn't affect what other people see.
Okay, well, I guess, let's just go with it then.
Yeah, I think other folks can adjust their view.
Okay.
Because what I was seeing looked fine.
Okay, well, we'll go with it then. Yeah, so we're talking about Great Lakes gray wolves, and gray wolves are one of the most broadly distributed mammals across the world. At one time living across most of Europe and Asia and much of North America. And the gray wolves in our region, we refer to them often as Great Lakes gray wolves. They're a little bit smaller than gray wolves that occur in like Yellowstone. These are various images of gray wolves from Wisconsin in both winter coats and summer coats. And some of the things that especially sticks out is that they're very long-legged, very tall animals. A typical wolf is about 30, 32 inches at the shoulder. In Wisconsin, they weigh from 55 to 108 pounds for adult size animals. 108 pounds is the largest wolf that we captured in Wisconsin when I was working for the department. That's about as big as Great Lakes wolves will get. In places like Yellowstone, they do get to be bigger, where the wolves as big as 150 pounds have been recorded. And the largest wolf on record, I think, is 175-pound wolf from Alaska. And they're called gray wolves because the overall coloration is kind of this grayish pattern. They're very narrow animals, so when they're walking, their feet really line up, and that middle image really illustrates that. The picture in the upper right shows more of the typical pattern of a winter coat, of a summer coat. We more often see them on the way they look on the left side in those winter coats, which make them look even heavier than what they really are. So these are just various images of wolves. And this is one I captured on a trail camera that's about 250 yards east of where I'm sitting right now. This was in late November, and it shows an image of me in that same setting. And it sort of illustrates the tallness of a wolf, because the shoulder height of that wolf will be about as tall as the upper part of a thigh of a 6-foot tall man. And the animal we most often confuse wolves with are coyotes, are a lot smaller. They weigh only about a half or third as much as a wolf. They tend to have a much more pointy face and more pointy ears. Tails often proportionally are somewhat longer. They have kind of shorter, spindly legs. So from a distance, even without having good measurements, often you can see kind of those spindly legs on a very pointy face. And if you can see a wolf like this image of a wolf and a coyote in the same image, gives you a real sense of the difference in size. That wolf is 30, 32 inches at the shoulder. The coyote is only about 20 inches at the shoulder, quite a bit shorter. We call them gray wolves, but they can range from nearly white, especially in the Arctic regions. In places like Western North America, Yellowstone, nearly half are black. In our region, only less than 5% are black. So that's a less common pattern in our area. And white wolves are very rare in our region, although some black wolves, when they become very old, just like some of us with dark hair become very light hair as we get older. Oops. See if I can back there. Previous. So wolves are somewhat controversial at times because they are meat eaters. They kill a lot of the same animals that some of us also go after. The average wolf in the Great Lakes region kills and consumes as much as 15 to 19 adult-sized deer per year. And a lot of those could be fawns. A study in Michigan shows that the average wolf kills about 9 fawns per year. In a study in Minnesota shows as many as 13 to 15 fawns per year. Beaver are typically their second most important food item and is averaging about 8 to 10 beaver per wolf, but that can range anywhere from 0 beaver to some wolves may be killing as many as 28 beaver in a year's time. When you look at the overall patterns of wolf kill on deer, with a population of about 1,000 wolves, that means they're killing about 20,000 deer in Wisconsin. That compares to over 200, 300,000 are typically harvested by our hunters. So it's a small percentage of the overall population, but for individual hunters in areas where there are wolf packs, that could mean less deer once wolves have established in the area. So one of the things that also happens with wolves is because of their predation on deer, they have these effects on the ecosystem. And this is often referred to as trophic cascade, in that wolves become kind of the shepherds of the deer herd in the northern forest. They move the deer around. They reduce overall presence of deer in any one area, which allows a greater diversity of wildflowers to grow in the middle of the wolf pack areas. It allows shrubs and trees to grow without overbrowsing by deer. So you have a healthier, more diverse forest where you have a healthy wolf population. We're also finding that wolves may be a major factor in the impacts on spread of diseases such as chronic wasting disease, that they can be a major factor that can reduce the spread of chronic wasting disease. A study in Spain shows that they can reduce the spread of tuberculosis in wild boar that can otherwise spread to cattle. So they have these ecological benefits on the landscape. A recent study in Wisconsin showed that counties that have wolves have much lower rates of vehicle collisions. And the reduced cost of those vehicle collisions is, I think, 10 times as much as any damage caused by wolves to livestock. So wolves are pack animals, they're territorial animals. The pack is a family unit that consists of a breeding pair. Traditionally, they've been called the alpha pairs, but that's going out of style now, and they're often just referred to as the breeding pair. And basically, it's a family group, so it's a mother and father. They're pups from the previous spring, yearlings from a previous year, and sometimes older wolves in the pack. Occasionally unrelated animals, but for the most part, the pack consists of related members. And the pack occupies a territory that they defend against members of their own species. Territories in Wisconsin are relatively small, 20 to 80 square miles. In places like Yellowstone, they're typically 200, 300 square miles. In some of the northern boreal and Arctic regions, they may be as much as 1,000 square miles. And wolves defend these territories kind of in 3 ways. They use scent marking, using their urinations and defecations. They use vocalizations through howling, advertising their presence through howling. And if you do the geometry on that, you can hear them they hear each other at 6 miles. So they can advertise their presence over a 115 square mile area just by howling. And they use active aggression. So this is some examples of marking by wolves. Scent marking, scraping, scratching, scats often are left in the middle of roads. These are all signs to other wolves that this is an occupied territory. And they can probably read from that the specific sex and age of the individuals, and perhaps even the specific individual. When the combination of scent marking and howling doesn't keep strange wolves out of a territory, then wolves will use active aggression. And in places where humans don't control wolf populations, the #1 mortality factor on wolves are other wolves. So a place like Yellowstone, Denali, Isle Royale, that's the #1 thing that controls the wolf population, are other wolves. And these territories are kind of distributed across the landscape, so that tends to be not a lot of overlap. This is an example of packs in the Clam Lake cable area from about a dozen years ago. And this hasn't changed really drastically since that time. The yellow maps for packs are monitored by radio telemetry, and that was using VHF radio collars where the animals were being located on a daily or once a week basis, usually during the daytime. More recently, the DNR has gone to satellite telemetry, and with those, they're getting several locations a day. And that normally shows a little bit larger home range area, but the core portions of the territory that's being actively defended is probably not all that much. It's probably about similar. And the numbers you're seeing there are the numbers being counted in those packs. And the average pack in Wisconsin in mid-late winter is only about 4 wolves, but it can range from as small as 2 to as many as 10 to 12. In places like Yellowstone, packs as large as 37 wolves have been recorded. So wolves are born into packs, but they normally don't become breeders in their home territory. So most of them have to leave their home territory to eventually become breeders. And we refer to these as dispersers, and dispersers on the average will travel 30 to 50 miles before they either join a new pack or start a pack of their own. But we've had some really tremendous movements of wolves in our region, dispersing wolves going as far as eastern Indiana, north central Missouri, wolves from the UP that have traveled into Minnesota and into Manitoba. So when they do these dispersal moves, occasionally they get very far out of normal wolf range and travel hundreds of miles, sometimes as much as 500 miles. So just kind of taking you through the annual cycle of wolves, we're right now approaching the breeding season. The main part of the breeding season is typically in February. It starts in late January, and the female will be going to estrus for about a week during some time during that period. The pack at this time is fairly cohesive. They're nomadic within their territory. They're traveling as a group. But when the female's in estrus, the breeding pair will often wander off by themselves more until the estrus period is ended, and then rejoin the rest of the pack. So the female will go through a 60 to 63 day gestation period, about 2 months, similar to our dogs. And so the pups will normally be born in April. The female will start spending time at a den site in early March, preparing the den for when the birthing is going to occur, and visit that den several times throughout that period until she's ready to have her pups. And once the pups are born, she'll be inside the den with them most of the time for the first few days. She'll be providing their milk, lactating for them, and they'll be weaned in about 2 months. And throughout that first 2 months, they're mostly staying at a den site. So by the time they're about 3 weeks old, they will start spending time, short periods of time outside the den, but will quickly scurry back into the den when there's any kind of sign of danger. Other pack members are kind of radiating out from the den site. The den represents the pack's home site during that spring period. The female, after the pups are about 3 weeks old, will start spending more time hunting with the rest of the pack. But initially, she'll be spending most of her time with the pups. And when the pups are about 2 months old, they're large enough, the pack moves them to their summer home sites we call rendezvous sites. And rendezvous sites are used from mid-June until the end of September, early October. At this point, the pups are large enough, they don't have to be inside of a den, but they're not large enough to join the rest of the pack hunting. So they're left behind at these sites where other pack members radiate from those sites to go out hunting and return to those sites. And because the whole pack returns to the same area, it's referred to as the rendezvous site where everybody returns. So by late September, early October, the pups are large enough. They no longer need to be left behind from the air or even from a distance. It's almost impossible to tell the pups from the adults anymore by that fall period. And the pack again starts to travel about its territory in a nomadic fashion without having any regular home site. So from October through March, the pack is traveling nomadically within their territory. So a little bit of a history of wolves in our region. At the time of European contact, wolves occurred throughout our region. Wisconsin might have had 3,000 to 5,000 wolves or more based on the numbers of large game, big ungulates we had in our area. In southern Wisconsin, wolves would have had white-tailed deer, bison, elk available. In northern Wisconsin, they would have had white-tailed deer, but at lower numbers, moose, and occasionally even caribou. And throughout the region, especially in forested areas, beaver would have been abundant as well as a second food source for them. So this is an image that I believe is from Russia, showing 25 wolves lined up. When whether packs this large occurred in Wisconsin, I guess we can speculate there may have been, especially when they're feeding on bison. But in recent times, when wolves have been more specialized than just deer and beaver, we tend to have much smaller packs. As I said earlier, Yellowstone does have packs as large as 37 recorded some years ago, but the more typical pack in Yellowstone would be 8 to 15 wolves. So wolves did share this landscape at various other nations. The Native American peoples lived across this region, and for most part, Native peoples were got along well with wolves. Wolves were an important part of the culture of many of the Native peoples. Many Native folks had wolf clans, and so wolves were revered by many of the Native peoples that lived in this area. But our European ancestors that were more livestock herding peoples had more competition with wolves and perceived them as more of a threat to them. And so as soon after Europeans start settling in the area, we start having bounties. And the state of Wisconsin had an ongoing bounty system that lasted from 1865 to 1957. And so people were being paid to kill wolves. And initially, there probably were some situations where wolves were detrimental to livestock, but toward the end, it was just killing wolves because they were seen as a threat and a competition for deer in our northern forest areas. So our wolf population was probably somewhere in the range of 3,000 to 5,000 in 1800, and by 1950, they're down to less than 50, and by 1960, they're mostly considered an extirpated species in Wisconsin. And then for about 15 years, wolves were considered an extirpated species. There might have been an occasional lone wolf passing through the state, but there was no solid evidence of a breeding population. With the elimination of bounties in Wisconsin in 1957, they were designated as state protected species, but they went extinct shortly thereafter. But that at least perhaps set the stage for them to return to the state. And shortly after the Federal Endangered Species Act of 1973 that protected wolves, and then the State Endangered Species Act the next year that also protected wolves, wolves from Minnesota start spreading back into Wisconsin. And a common myth we deal with are that people believing that wolves were reintroduced in the state, which is not the case. They came back on their own. So with the return of the wolf population, in 1979, the Wisconsin DNR started a formal monitoring program, which included live trapping and radio collaring wolves, so you could see views like this from the air. It'd be nearly impossible to get a view like this unless you had a collared wolf you could fly in on. And in recent years, as many as a couple of dozen wolves are captured and collared each year, and as many as 75, 76 are on the air in any 1 year's time out of a population of about 1,000 wolves. Radio telemetry is costly. Takes time and difficult to get every pack collared. In the early years, most packs were collared, but in more recent years, it's only a percentage of packs that are radio collared. So the department also relies heavily on snow track surveys, where people just slowly drive forest roads and search for the tracks of wolves within their territories. And some of that may be done by foot. And since 1995, the Wisconsin DNR has also had a volunteer carnivore tracker program, a citizen science program for people interested in helping track wolves and other forest carnivores. And along with radio telemetry and snow track surveys, the department relies on public observations. In recent years, often those are illustrations such as these of trail cameras where wolves are captured on trail cameras, but it can be just somebody's observations of the wolf and then reporting it to the department. So this is a map of how wolf monitoring surveying was done through 2020 and how it was called a minimum counting system using territorial mapping. So the attempts were to try to locate every wolf pack area across the state and count each wolf in each territory. And the department has modified that system in recent years, but this shows the map for 2012. So all the packs that are purple were monitored by radio telemetry. All the packs that were blue were monitored in previous years by radio telemetry, but didn't have a radio collared wolf in it that year. So they were monitored by snow track surveys. And then all the yellow wolves are being monitored just by snow track surveys alone. And this map shows the success of wolf recovery in Wisconsin, how this is really a conservation success story. So the very light blue represents the first wolves in Wisconsin, which starts as a small blob there in northwestern Wisconsin in Douglas County. Also a small blob that starts just north of Wausau in north central Wisconsin. And then as you get to darker colors, it kind of, more recent times, as it spreads out across the landscape. So now we have wolves occurring across all of our northern forests and our central forest regions of Wisconsin and some of the areas in between. So wolf management in Wisconsin has been based on several plans. In the 1980s, the department developed a state recovery plan, and that set a goal of achieving a population of at least 80 wolves of 3 or more years for the population to be considered from endangered to a threat on a statewide basis. Then in 1999, the state developed a state management plan, and that set a goal of delisting wolves as a state endangered and threatened species with a population of at least 250 wolves outside of Indian reservations. And the reason it was outside of reservations because the state does not have management authority on reservation land. So the goals are based on those wolves that the state had management authority on. And that plan also set a goal of a management goal of at least 350 wolves across the state, and had 14 strategies for achieving those goals. There were some slight modifications made to that plan in 2007 and several attempts to update the plan in 2009 through 2014, but unfortunately that 99 plan has not been updated, and so the department is just getting around to finally updating that plan. So we are operating on a relatively old plan. So this graph shows the growth of the wolf population in relationship to the various state listings, and state listings are independent of the federal listings, but here the population below 80 was considered endangered, between 80 and 250 was considered a threatened population, and the goal was to achieve a population of at least 350 wolves. And that was based on two things. One, at the time was assumed the carrying capacity based on analysis was about 500 wolves for Wisconsin. So 350 seemed like a reasonable management goal. More recent research shows that the carrying capacity is probably well over 1,200 wolves. So we underestimated potential carrying capacity. And there was also an assumption in the 99 plan that the state would have full management authority in 2000. And that didn't occur until 2007 and has reversed back and forth several times. So lack of state authority to manage the wolf population and underestimation of the carrying capacity result in the population growing much higher than what we had anticipated. But the population in recent years seems to be somewhat stabilizing at about 1,000 wolves. We see a dip in the population during periods when there were hunting seasons, but that dip started reversing itself even while there were still hunting seasons. So it demonstrates that with hunting season, population could be reduced, but that you could still have a hunting season without necessarily being detrimental to the wolf population. This graphic now shows the same growth of the wolf population, just showing the statewide minimum count, and the blue line being the number of packs, but against the various federal delistings. So as I had said earlier, they were listed as endangered species in 74, and they were downlisted for a short time in 2003, but relisted because of court challenges, and then delisted in 2007, which meant the state had full management authority. But again, there were court challenges. They went back on endangered species list. So we have this back and forth where they're state managed species versus a federally listed species. And most recently, wolves were again delisted in January of 2021. So traditionally, the DNR has used this minimum counting system for counting wolves, and that's been recently modified to a population estimation, which tries to get more closely to the actual population. The minimum count assumes that you're probably missing some animals in the population, with this new population estimation, it's assumed it more closely resembles the actual population. But there's a very broad confidence interval, and those minimum counts are normally captured within those confidence intervals of that population estimation. And most recently estimating somewhere a little over 1,000 wolves in Wisconsin, 1,011 to 1,100 wolves in Wisconsin. So while wolves do have these ecological benefits, there's a downside from wolves, and that can be some of the detrimental livestock issues and other depredations they may cause. So this graphic shows the number of complaints received by USDA Wildlife Services, the organization that's contracted by DNR to investigate and deal with wolf depredation issues. And the blue represents the number of complaints. The red represents the number of those that are actually verified as being caused by wolves. So what you see is that there's twice as many complaints than there are actual issues caused by wolves. And even of those that were caused by wolves, sometimes it was verified wolves are there, but sometimes it's not any really problems they're causing. This graphic just shows the growth of the number of farms that had wolf depredation issues, which peaks in about 2010, but it declines thereafter, especially when the DNR had more flexible management authority. After the DNR lost that management authority in 2015, the number of depredations come up somewhat, but not as drastically as they had been earlier. When wolves are delisted or downlisted, the state does get management authority to use lethal controls on problem wolves. And this graphic shows the number of problem wolves caught at farms, blue representing the number of wolves caught, and then the brown represents those that were euthanized. After 2002, the DNR stopped translocating or moving problem wolves across the state. Up until that time, when the state had no authority to use lethal controls, these animals normally would be just moved across the state. But the things that have happened since then is that we've had the wolf population mostly saturated the landscape. There really aren't places to place problem wolves anymore. And most counties in wolf range have passed resolutions against the relocation of problem wolves into their counties. So this is no longer being done. We do occasionally have human safety concerns, and these are not attacks, but incidents where wolves have kind of lost their fear of people. And there have been attacks on wolves in people in other parts of North America. They're relatively rare, but they can occur. So when wolves start displaying unusual behaviors, often there's some controls done on problem wolves. There are a lot of non-lethal controls that are also used by wildlife services, and this shows a number of projects. It went way down when the state had management authority to use lethal controls, but there's probably been more use of non-lethal controls in Wisconsin than any state in the US for wolf management. And he just shows some examples of some of those using this flagging, the flattery, electric fencing, noise devices, scare devices, flashing lights, guard animals, all are work at times, but not always. One of the big concerns with wolves too are interactions with dogs. There have been some cases of wolf depredations. This is a case of a wolf that I had detected that was on a deer carcass where I had a trail camera about a quarter mile from my house. And this was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I walked in on this site with my dog. This is the scene of the wolf right after I saw the wolf and yelled at my dog. The wolf just ran away, so it wasn't an issue for us. But there are cases of wolves occasionally killing dogs. It most commonly happens with the kind of dogs used in hound hunting for bears, for bobcats, for coyotes. And especially in September, July, August, and September, that same time period when wolves are using their rendezvous sites, when the packs are very defensive of their pups at those rendezvous sites, is also a time that training occurs on hounds used for hunting bears, and the bear hunting season occurs. So those overlap each other, and so that's part of the reason we see these depredations. It typically averages about 20 dogs per year. It got as low as 7 in 2012, but as high as 41 in 2016. Now, 2016 was a policy effect that that year, the DNR eliminated special permits for training on hounds. And I think we had a lot more people trying out their dogs, and unfortunately, some ran into problems with wolves. The other situation with dogs are referred to as pet dogs, and this is not breed specific, just situation specific. And those dogs that somebody living in wolf range lets a dog run outside the house and happens to encounter a wolf, or walking a dog near their home and encountering a wolf. And we see that sort of peaks about 2009, and it's mostly been reduced since then. I think part of that is by educational programs. And this is a map that just kind of shows depredations across Wisconsin. So I'm going to move up ahead a little bit because I want to talk about some of the more recent things that are occurring. So I had mentioned that in 2012, wolves were delisted, and they remained delisted for 3 years. And at that time, delisting was done just in the Great Lakes region, representing this area. The dark blue are where wolves were actually living, but the whole area represents the Great Lakes region that was delisted at that time, was relisted in December of 2014. And with the delisting, a hunting season was started. A hunting trapping season was dictated by the legislation. The DNR had kind of minimum input on it. The DNR did have authority to limit permits and quotas, but the season was set to start October 15 and end at the end of February, or when quotas were reached in certain units. It did require a 24-hour period of reporting wolf harvest. And this table shows the harvest of wolves during those years. In 2012, the total harvest was 117 wolves. That year, the population remained about the same. 2013, the department tried to reduce the population by about 15% to try to reduce some of the conflicts. And that was a year on that graph, we saw that big dip in the population. The department reduced the number of quotas the next year. And that year, the population actually increased somewhat. The seasons on these closed when the quotas are reached in various units. And what we saw the first year, most of those were closed in December and in November. By 2014, the hunters and trappers were becoming fairly efficient, and the seasons were closing early in October or in November. The big significance of this is that the law allows the use of hounds for hunting wolves after the firearm deer season, but most of these areas were closed before that was allowed. The most recent delisting that occurred in 2021, the department was forced into a wolf hunting season. The department wanted to wait until fall, but were forced to hold a wolf hunting season in February, in the middle of the breeding season, the time period that we've never hunted wolves before, and allowed full use of dogs. And 88% of wolves that were harvested dogs. And in 3 days' time, the quota was over harvested almost by 100%, or 183% above what the quota was intended to be. So 218 wolves were harvested. The department had intended to hold a wolf hunting and trapping season again this fall, and the department initially proposed a quota of 130 wolves. The Natural Resource Board, the policy setting board, overturned the department's quota and instead recommended 300 wolves. That resulted in a couple lawsuits being filed, and the department itself decided to again go to 130 wolf quota, but because it wasn't quite clear how that was going to be resolved, a state court passed an injunction on October 22nd to stop the wolf hunt. A federal court considered also stopping the wolf hunt, but because it already was an injunction, didn't act on it. So the wolf hunt was stopped this last fall because of these injunctions. In all likeliness, there probably will be a wolf hunt this next year, unless the wolves go back on the endangered species list, which is another issue being challenged in the courts. And there was a hearing on that in November, and the judge has not ruled on that yet. And there's a possibility, as has occurred in previous years, wolves may go back on the endangered species list. In the meantime, the other things going on is the state is updating its wolf management plan. And at the end of March, early April, we should have a draft plan, so anybody can comment on that plan. The other thing is that the state conservation hearings in early April, we'll have a question on it, whether people approve of the use of dogs for hunting wolves. So urge people to attend those county conservation hearings, these hearings that are held in each county across the state, that will be held virtually, so you can vote on those from your home. And so those are kind of the things coming up. I've got a few things here of things people can do to conserve wolves, but I guess I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So why don't we just jump into questions here?
Okay, great. Adrian, you might want to stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
And then we can put the three of us up.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Ooh, stop share. Okay, here's the stop share. Okay.
Okay, great. So thank you so much. We have a number of questions. Let's get started. I'm going to try to do these in the order that they were received. Is there any concern or research on chronic wasting disease making a leap to wolves?
There has not been specifically on wolves, but I just saw a research article that shows that dogs do not catch it readily. And while their scats may contain some amount of it, but most of it does disappear once it goes through the digestive system of dogs. So dogs seem quite resilient to chronic wasting disease. So that being the case, I think likely wolves will be as well.
Thank you. And I'm going to encourage people to put their question and answers in the Q&A section and not in the chat, because it's hard to monitor both, and my dog just decided that she had to sit on my lap, so it's getting complicated over here.
You like the program.
Okay, from your population graphs, it looks like a state population of more than 550 recovered fairly rapidly, but lower populations took years to approach a non-threatened level. Why has it been so difficult to get the DNR to change the management plan to support a healthy population?
Well, actually, it took quite a long to get to the 550 level. If you looked at that graph closely, for the first 20 years, the population was not growing very rapidly. It started really taking off in the mid-1990s from a population that reestablished in the mid-1970s. But I think there have been several reasons that the department's position, I think in part has been that when the state felt they didn't have management authority, when they were still federally listed, there was less of a need to update the plan. I think that was kind of the rationale being used. But part of it is, I guess, the decision by the department deciding that they wanted to wait till they had full management authority to update the plan. But unfortunately, they waited too long, and now the plan has become very much outdated.
Okay, when the problem wolves, that's quote, problem wolves were translocated, did they continue to be problems, or was the translocation successful? And that's the questioner's quotes, not me.
Sure. Relocated wolves, most did not cause problems, but a few did go back to farm sites and become depredators. And that is one of the risks when you relocate problem wolves, is that potentially you're just moving a problem animal from one location to another area. And it's already controversial to farmers when they lose livestock to wolves and move in on their own. It's much more controversial when those wolves are brought in by the DNR. So that was one of the reasons that discontinuation of relocating wolves.
What is the current status of wolf dog hybrids?
They are illegal in Wisconsin. They have been designated as illegal to own since 2010. To own a wolf dog hybrid, you have to have pens that are approved by the department, and you have to keep the animals sterile. And the pen requirements are similar to if you had captive wolves or captive bears or those kind of things. So they're highly restricted in Wisconsin. Their occurrence in the landscape is relatively rare now, when I was working with the wolf program, before we had those regulations, it was not uncommon for occasional wolf dog hybrids to get in the wild. They were perceived to mostly be animals produced in captivity that just escaped into the wild.
Why do we think Biden and the Interior Secretary are doing so little in this area?
I think wolf management has been kind of controversial over time, and the goals of wolf management always had been to recover populations and delist them. And delisting used to be perceived as the end point of recovery. Unfortunately, I think delisting itself has become politicized. And in Wisconsin, it's been unfortunate that our legislature sort of tied the start of hunting and trapping seasons to delisting. Those should have been kept as separate issues. Delisting to me means the state has management authority and has flexible management authority. And unfortunately, the way it's now tied to the legislation, that in Wisconsin, as soon as they are delisted, the state is required to hold a wolf hunting and trapping season. That's not the case in Michigan or Minnesota. And I think if the two issues were kept separate, I think there would be much greater acceptance to wolves. So the delisting of wolves goes back to the 1990s, actually. The Clinton administration actually was the first administration that started the delisting process in the Great Lakes region. It wasn't completed until it got into the Bush administration. But so every administration since the Clinton administration has approved and recommended the delisting of wolves in the Great Lakes region. So Biden is basically just following what his predecessors have been doing.
What would you like to see in wolf management, given your expertise and long history studying wolves?
Well, I guess I'd like to see more return to science. I would like to see the state regulations on hunting and trapping become something of the DNR can or may allow the hunting and trapping of wolves when there's a harvestable, and allow the DNR to regulate more of how a hunting season should be done, what areas are open, what areas are closed, if the season should occur, the length of the season. I think the idea of even allowing hunting during the breeding season it makes absolutely no sense. The population goals from the old 99 plan made sense at the time when we thought the carrying capacity was about 500 wolves. We need to get away from that numbers. I'm not sure we need a number, but attempted to stabilize the population near current levels, and focus more on other attributes, the ecological benefits that wolves are providing, that use those as more of the issues. Our levels of depredations up or down, and focus on the areas where the depredations are occurring if we need to control the wolf population. Allowing some kind of a hunting season, I don't oppose that, but I think the use of dogs and extending way into the breeding periods of January and February just does not make sense. Those are some of the things, and we've written a lot of these things in our vision statement by Wisconsin Green Fire, and I think that sort of reflects the vision statement that we've written there, as well as we've made comments on the February wolf hunt.
Just to add to that, and Green Fire has had 4 of our members actually on the state's wolf management plan committee, and contributed a lot of really detailed recommendations to the department. Even if there's no change in current law, which we're not seeing really progressive changes in current law these days. So assuming that the department is still bound by the current requirement to have a hunt, we think that there is a lot of flexibility the department could exercise with the way the hunt's regulated. And a really important one that we identified from the February hunt was that over, I think 86% of the animals that were taken in that February hunt were taken off of public lands, far from the locations of where wolf-human conflicts were occurring. So the idea that we're solving a problem or reducing human-wolf conflicts through the current hunting is just primarily not true. But the department would have the authority to target hunting in places where the conflicts are most common and limit hunting in the core habitats that are best able to support healthy populations. So there are still a lot of tools in the toolkit, and that's something that we're pushing for.
The author of that question followed up with, how do we leverage our lawmakers who are not experts in this area to follow the science and the guidelines of experts like you guys?
I guess that's just a very broad challenge in general. I mean, that is part of the reason organizations like Green Fire have started, because we are hoping to change the mind of some of our legislators to pay more attention to the science. Part of it will be just people's voting. Things such as the gerrymandering of our voting system in Wisconsin has made it more difficult to get a diverse background of legislators that support the use of science in making these kind of natural resource management decisions, instead of just appealing to certain stakeholder groups.
Yeah. And it is unfortunate to us that wolves are often such a litmus test issue and sort of a surrogate for, politics and your views about nature. And we really believe that we've got a potential for a successful recovery of the species with 1,000 animals or more on the landscape, in a level of conflict and sort of depredation that is not zero, but it's manageable, and it's being managed. And we don't have to take the wolf population back to 300 animals. So we're just trying to continue to bring science and understanding of the role wolves play in the landscape. As Adrian said, they contribute to better balance in forest ecology. They contribute to actually healthier, more robust populations of deer. And I don't think everyone fully realizes the benefits that even a relatively small wolf population has on the landscape.
I'm going to say this question and then plug my computer in. So I'm going to disappear for a minute. Thank you for those comments. How do hunters take more wolves than the target number? Can't they just give permits for the number that should be taken?
Well, typically in many wildlife harvests, and this occurs for deer, for bear, for others, that the number of permits issued is considerably more than the quota, because rarely do you have 100% success rate on any wildlife species. The one species that you might have 100% success rate or close to are probably elk, but beyond that, very few wildlife species do you have 100% success rate. So typically the department, based on previous success rates, makes an estimate of what the success rate is going to be. And in the case of, that was one of the problems with the February wolf hunt, the department actually assumed about 10 permits per wolf to be harvested. And in most years, even when you offered 10 permits, only 7 of those people actually would still buy those permits. So you would have maybe on the average 6-7 hunters per wolf. One of the Natural Resource Board members doubled the number of permits because the hunting season was going to be so short, and instead offered 20 permits per wolf to be harvested. So that drastically increased the number of permits out there for wolves to be harvested. So that's one of the things the department was looking at for this fall hunt, and I think we'll be looking at this next year. Their fall hunt is reducing the number of permits. They're not going to reduce it to just 1 permit per wolf, but to a number that's more reasonable, so that you're not going to have this kind of over harvest.
Okay. In your opinion, is some kind of targeted wolf hunting season needed to control wolf populations and conflicts?
I guess it's kind of a loaded question, because needed is sort of a value judgment, but does it provide benefits? I think it has some benefits. I think in rural areas, it creates perhaps better acceptance of wolves. People are kind of used to having bears hunted and deer hunted, and most of our fur bearer animals are hunted and trapped species. And by having wolves as a hunted species with some limited quota, I think it creates a better acceptance of wolves on the landscape. But I think it has to be a well-managed hunting season and carefully regulated hunting season. And I think that's what most people expect, not what we had this last February, where it was a kind of a free-for-all. And I think the complaints I hear about the February wolf hunt, I hear it more from other hunters. So it's not the anti-hunters or non-hunters that are complaining about it. Hunters are we're very disappointed the way this hunting season was was run. It was an embarrassment to many hunters. I think I heard a dog barking there.
I'm sorry, my family left and and the dog's driving me crazy. I apologize, everybody. As the wolf population approaches carrying capacity in northern zones, is there any evidence that they are expanding their range south?
Well, there has been kind of a gradual spread of the wolf population southward. We do have wolf packs. Most recently, we had some near Wisconsin Dells, just a little bit north of Madison. For a while, there was a pack living over near Viroqua in southwestern Wisconsin. The main packs are probably occurring kind of north of Wisconsin Dells in Adams and Juneau County. But there have been packs. It seems like these more southern packs that are kind of disjoint from the rest of the wolf population kind of go through this process of winking in and winking out, that they exist for a year or two and then kind of disappear. So we do have packs occasionally establishing, but they're more marginal areas, so they are less able to persist on the landscape.
Great. The next question kind of goes back to some of your comments earlier about hunting seasons. Are people more tolerant of wolves on the landscape when managed hunting seasons for them are implemented?
Well, there's a variety of research on there, but nothing that you can absolutely state one way or the other. I know that Eric Olson, a professor at Northern College, in his PhD work, looked at a period from 2003 through 2011 when wolves were on and off the endangered species list about half the time. And what Eric found was during periods when wolves had some kind of state management authority, that the rate of illegal killing was about half as high as it was during periods when they're federally listed as endangered. So there's some indication that a greater acceptance. I think I've seen some other research that's also supporting that that some level of wolf hunting seems to create greater acceptance. Not the whole population, not everybody, but amongst some people, that it creates better acceptance of wolves on the landscape.
Okay. We have gone over time. I'll keep asking questions, but I think at some point the webinar might cut us off.
Okay.
And so if that happens, I apologize if people's questions couldn't get answered. And just in case, I want to thank you both for coming and giving this talk. It's been tremendous.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, but we have about 9 more questions to go, so maybe we can squeeze them in. How many farmers are open to alternative strategies to reduce livestock depredation?
I think most farmers are open to almost any strategy that helps them reduce depredations. I think most probably still want to have some level of lethal control as a backup system. But I think most farmers in wolf range that have had problems have learned to somewhat deal with them, improve their fencing, change some of their practices when they let their calves out, maybe hanging on to the calves a little bit longer after they're born in the spring, and secure pens before they release them into more open pasture areas, more carefully patrolling. Some of it is just increased time just checking on the herd, which can be more costly for farmers. So farming often operates on a very narrow profit margin. So many of these farmers also have second jobs that they have to go to. And if they have to spend more time patrolling their pastures to check on their cattle, it sometimes becomes more difficult and may interfere with some of their other abilities to work.
When deer hunters say that wolves are killing too many deer, how do you respond? And do you recommend a general response that all of us should be using?
Well, I guess one of the things is that, you can look at the statistics of the number of deer that are probably killed by wolves versus hunters across the state. And there is no scientific evidence that wolves are causing any major decline in the deer herd in the state. There are places that have lower deer numbers. In some places, it's because of winter conditions, and that's usually the more common factor that will affect the deer herd. I think you can point to the other various mortality factors affecting the deer population. And if you take a close look at some of our other predators, I did some assessment of predators on deer in Bayfield County recently. And if you look at the number of wolves, the number of deer they kill, wolves kill more deer than the other predators, but bears and coyotes and bobcats live in much higher density. So when you look at the actual deer they kill, bears and bobcats and coyotes all kill more deer than wolves do. So wolves are just part of the predators out there. That there isn't a scientific evidence that they're drastically reducing the deer population. And the number one predator on a deer are still us.
Adrian, maybe you would comment on this too, but I think we also understand that wolves have an impact on deer patterns and deer movement and behavior.
That's true too. And probably as much as a perception. Often, so much of what we deal with in wildlife management are perceptions of what wolves do, perceptions of what deer do, perceptions of how many deer there are. And often the perceptions are what you see from your back 40 where you're hunting. And the other thing, along with the impact on the density, is pretty minor, but they can affect the movement patterns of deer. So if there's a regular presence of wolves, deer may be spending less time in an area. I myself, this last deer hunting season, hunting near my home here, I saw 5 wolves and 4 deer. The presence of wolves nearby might have reduced some of the activity of deer in my area. So that could be a factor as well, is that it affects some of the movement patterns of deer without having a drastic impact on the population. So to hunters, that's probably still a factor, is that they don't get to see as many deer because wolves are causing them to be more secretive.
With cows being one species that wolves occasionally kill, and there's a population of 3 million cows in the state, this questioner is saying, but only less than 25 cows were killed in 2020. Why is livestock protection considered a good reason to hunt wolves?
Well, as Fred pointed out, that unless it's very carefully designed, livestock protection rarely occurs with wolf harvest seasons. So that's by itself is usually not a good excuse unless you really focus it in the zone where the livestock are occurring. The most effective way to deal with livestock depredations are on the farm or near the farm controls, combination of lethal and non-lethal controls. But in the past, we know that the more complaints that are received on wolves, the likeliness the department has more pressure on it to lower the wolf population. So those 25 cattle may represent a very small part of the cattle in the state, but the farmers with those cattle are talking to their neighbors, and the neighbors are talking to their other neighbors. And so there's a perception that there's a real problem occurring in the area, and that those are the kind of things that push for more aggressive harvest on the wolf population.
And I think, Adrian, it's also true, isn't it, that with delisting, increased authority for dealing with problem wolves also created more tools basically to help limit impacts, right?
That's true. And I know that I don't know what the permits were in recent time, but when wolves were delisted in 2012, the department issued like 130 permits to landowners to kill wolves on their property where they've had problems or their neighbors that had problems. Of those 130 people, 18 wolves were killed by, I think, a dozen people. So the vast majority were not killing wolves, but the majority of those people felt that they had control on their property and were able to protect their property. So it had a real psychological boost for them to be able to give them these permits. And I think that's often perception is, this is a federally listed species. I can't do anything about it. I can't protect my own animals. And just being able to issue these permits and knowing they could themselves protect their livestock, I think was really important to these people. And it didn't really result in a lot of wolves being killed, but I think it created a lot of good relationships for farmers toward wolf management.
The next question is about your Green Fire's report on wolves, and they're asking if you have multi-generational diverse members, what people from that group contribute to your reports on wolves.
Yeah, so reports are all team products that are contributed to both by our career members who have expertise on an issue. And so in the case of our report on the February wolf hunt, I think we had 8 different authors on that piece. The question was multi-generational authors. We have at least one millennial on that author team. But you know, we started out life as an organization primarily of late career or recent retiree members, people in their 50s and 60s, sometimes a bit older. We've become more diverse in age in our organization as a result of forming a student and young professional chapter. And in fact, those folks are often involved with our work groups and contributing to our work. And it really adds new perspectives for us and new voices and new audiences. So it's something that we're doing more of.
Can you give your opinion on, wait a minute, did I miss the one about the wolves on Isle Royale?
You didn't say anything about that.
I didn't. Okay, I'm sorry. What is the latest on wolves on Isle Royale? Has the population grown? The last this person heard was that NPS was debating whether they should interfere and add wolves.
Okay, so yeah, there have been a bunch of wolves released on Isle Royale, and I don't have the current numbers, but there were wolves from northeastern Minnesota, from northern parts of UP of Michigan, from Ontario and Michigapoton Island in the eastern part of Lake Superior, where wolves had been on this island where they're feeding on caribou, and the caribou, it was too small an island to really support a viable wolf population, and the caribou were dying out, and the last of the wolves that were starving to death were removed from the island and released on Isle Royale. I believe they're at about 15 some animals right now. I know that Rolf Peterson from Michigan Tech is again doing his winter study that have been ongoing since Dave Meach started those, I think in 1958. The first last year was the only time they weren't able to do their winter study because of the COVID situation. But each winter they're out there serving. And yeah, my understanding is I believe it's about 15 wolves out on the landscape right now.
Can you give your opinion on using dogs in any hunt, and what does it look like in nearby states?
Well, Wisconsin is the only state that authorizes the use of dogs for hunting wolves. We're one of several states that uses dogs for hunting bears. Many states that allow the use of dogs for hunting raccoons or bobcats, coyotes. I think wolves, that to me just seems, because one, they can't climb trees like some of these other animals. And it just, the likeliness of encounters between the animals and fights that both dogs and wolves are going to get injured by. And Wisconsin law does not allow you to kill animals with dogs. So I hunted birds for years with my dog. She passed away a couple of years ago, but I certainly think that bird hunting it can be enhanced with dogs as far as retrieving the birds or finding birds. So I think dogs certainly have their place in hunting in some situations. But I think the use of dogs for wolf hunting just to me does not seem like a fair, reasonable, fair chase practice.
Why do you think that Wisconsinites seem to favor and tolerate black bears, which take many more fawns and calves more than wolves? Could we use those attitudes to increase tolerance to wolves?
I think in part because people just don't think about black bears being that important a predator. And some of it is just education, that we need to educate people more about what all the various predators out there, and that they all have potential impacts on the ecosystem and impacts on the deer herd. And it's not just the wolves alone, but I think because wolves, they're a large predator, I think people more often encounter their kills because they're active in the wintertime. And if you're a hunter in the woods and you come upon a deer killed by wolves, one that you were hoping to kill yourself, I suppose it can create some prejudice, some reaction toward wolves that you probably aren't going to see with bears, because any fawn they eat in the summertime is going to be totally cleaned up and you're not going to see any sign of it.
Somebody has a question about the way you voted on a bill, Fred. And it says, why did you vote for the bill that Green Fires has complained about, or no, that Green Fire has complained about in committee? And it was the same then as it is now.
Right. So the person's referring to my time in the state assembly. I did vote to advance the wolf hunting bill in committee. I believe that I later voted against it on the floor, but we have consistently had a position that that bill is really contrary to good natural resource management. And it's also the case, however, that even with the current law and the law in place that requires the department to hold this hunt, it's the attitude and the culture around wolves and the lawsuits that, you know, the February hunt being the classic example where the department wanted to take a responsible position, not hold a hunt in the middle of winter. And the only reason it was forced to do it was because of a group that went judge shopping for a friendly judge in Jefferson County to force them to hold that hunt. So despite the fact that the current law is not ideal and we think it should be changed, we also just need to deal with the culture around wolves and try to get back more balance around understanding the species.
Okay, this is an easy one. What is the average wolf lifespan in years in Wisconsin?
It's actually not that easy, but it probably, depending on, you know, if you're a pup, we probably lose 3/4, 2/3 of our pups before the end of their first year. If you make it past your first year, it's probably more like 4 or 5 years. The maximum is about 13, 14 years, but very few wolves get to be that old.
Somebody's saying, thank you very much. This was very informative, and having the scientific data is so critical. Thank you for your work and commitment to educating our leaders and community.
Thank you.
And we have, and then somebody's asking, and then finally a comment, sort of question is, there's something majestic about the wolf and being near them. What opportunities do Wisconsinites have to experience our packs?
Well, there's probably quite a variety, but one of the things I talked about is our volunteer tracker program. If people want to get involved in that, if they got some place where there are wolves living that they can drive to, the department is always looking for additional volunteers to get involved in wolf tracking. We do offer various programs for taking people out wolf howling. I normally do one with the Wisconsin Natural Resource Foundation in early August. In the Timberwolf Alliance, we have a whole wolf weekend at Lake Nemacoggin, where we go out howling on Friday and Saturday night and search for wolf sign and learn about wolves in the area, as well as overall wolf biology and ecology. And Fred, I think we were talking about perhaps putting on an additional get together with through Green Fire in somewhere in northern Wisconsin and talk to people about wolves and take them out howling sometime in July, August, or September.
Yeah, stay tuned for our field trip program coming up this summer, and a wolf howl will be one of those trips. So.
Sounds like fun. I've done it with coyotes, yeah. Agree with this, let's see, somebody's agreeing with the speaker appreciation of expertise. Just unfortunately, the people we hope to change are not here listening to things. And then somebody's asking if we might ever see wolves in the Driftless region.
Well, there have been wolves, and I think the Driftless area actually is a common area where dispersing wolves travel through. There was a pack living in Crawford, Viroqua County, Vernon County a couple of years ago for a couple of years, but then it sort of disappeared. It was a nuisance pack, a depredating pack, but wolves are commonly observed in Iowa, in Illinois, and I think a lot of those coming through the Driftless area. I know some years ago we had a wolf from Fort McCoy that was being monitored by radio telemetry VHF where the pilots had to fly it and spend a lot of time traveling through the driftless area. So I think the driftless area is probably a common place that dispersing wolves are traveling through, even though there might not be regular presence of packs.
Great. Well, that brings us to the end of our questions, and there's been many comments about how informative and interesting this has been, and a number of people are thanking you for your time and your work. So we really appreciate it. I want to, for the people who are still here, Fred has listed how to learn more about Wisconsin's Green Fire. He's listed their website in the chat, and he's been publishing where to get the reports. So what I will make sure happens is we pull those links out and send them out in the email that goes out to everybody who registered to come to this talk today. So I think that's it, and I really can't thank you enough. This has been tremendous, and I wish you the best and good luck.
Thanks for hosting us. It's a wonderful program tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having us on. Stay warm.
Okay, for sure. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.